Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park and have been made possible in part by Ravinia Festival, CJE Senior Life, GAN Music and Sound.
Hi, I'm Joyce Bernstein. I'm a member of the Senior Highland Park Producers, and today I have a brilliant and distinguished guest, Roberta R. Quall. That's Kwall, and she's known to many as Bobby, so we'll call her Bobby. Bobby is currently a professor of law at DePaul University, co-director of the Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies, and director of the Center for Intellectual Property Law and Informational Technology. She is originally from New Jersey, but is a Highland Park resident. She earned her JD from the University of Pennsylvania and her AB magna cum laude from Brown University. She has written 34 scholarly papers and several books, including The Soul of Creativity, and she has received numerous awards, and in 2006 was named as one of the 10 best lawyers in the state of Illinois.
Law professors.
Law professors, sorry. Okay, hi Bobby, how are you?
Hi Joyce, thank you so much for having me. This is an honor and a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And, well, let's start with your Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies. You co-direct this. And now DePaul is a Catholic school, so how did the center come about?
DePaul is indeed a Catholic school. Not only are we Catholic, DePaul endorses what is known as the Vincentian Mission. We are a Catholic school of the Vincentian Order. Oh. So, and we are the largest, I believe DePaul is the largest private university in the country, so I recall. Anyway, we are now in our 6th year. The Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies is now starting its 6th year. When we first started the center, my co-director and I thought it would be a good time to start putting DePaul in a very positive light in the news. Mm-hmm. We had prior to that some situations involving a one-time professor named Norman Finkelstein, who had created quite a furor, not a positive one, in the Jewish community. The president of DePaul actually confirmed a tenure denial, and it was unfortunate. It was a lot of negative, publicity within the Jewish community, although ultimately, again, the result was one that the Jewish community was in favor of. But, there was that situation. There's, some other political issues that are very prevalent now on college campuses, not just DePaul. Mm-hmm. And so we thought the time might be right to showcase DePaul in a positive light for the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. My co-director and I have been colleagues at that point for close to 20 years. We're both longtime veteran faculty members, and we thought it might be a good opportunity to really do something very positive, not just for the law school, but also for the Jewish community. And when we started, it was actually very sweet. We went to visit the president of the university, Father Holschneider, who of course is a priest, and he said that he loved what we were doing. He was very supportive of it, and he actually said to us that DePaul was started. The university was started as a place where both Catholics and Jews could go to school.
Oh.
Because there was a very rigid quota system in place, and this was true certainly at the law school level. And so DePaul was started for that purpose, and so he was really excited
Oh, good.
about the fact that we now have this mission and this Center for Jewish Law and Judaic Studies.
Yeah, I attended DePaul, but in the undergraduate division.
Right, right. A lot of Jewish alums
I
are.
studied a lot of philosophy and theology. It was quite different than other schools like University of Illinois. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I liked going there too. So, what makes your center particularly unique?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's a number of things that makes our center unique. First of all, just having a Jewish law center, let alone one in a Catholic university.
Oh,
but just
right.
having a Jewish law center in a law school is unique.
Yes.
There are very few schools, I think maybe under 5 law schools that have Jewish law centers.
In the United States or
In the-
worldwide?
In the United States.
Oh, okay.
In the United States. So we are one of a very, very small handful, and I believe we are probably the only Catholic law school to have a
Oh,
Jewish law
yeah.
center. And we are also the only Jewish law center in the Midwest.
Oh.
There's a couple of schools with Jewish law centers in New York.
I was going to say probably
Yes,
New York.
and a couple on the coast, on the West Coast, but we are the only one in the Midwest. So that in and of itself makes for a very unique
Correct,
situation. I also think that the partnership that I have with my co-director is unique. My co-director is a Baal Shuv, meaning he's was not raised religious necessarily.
Oh.
He was actually he actually was raised with religion, but he wasn't Orthodox. He didn't grow up Orthodox. And shortly around the time he was in law school, or shortly after he graduated from law school, he actually became more and more interested in serious observance. And so he studied in a yeshiva in Lakewood. He was ordained. He's a brilliant gentleman. And the interesting part about this is that we co-direct a center. He is visibly Orthodox. He wears black and white and has a long beard, and is certainly identified and affiliated with a centrist Orthodox community. And here I am as a from conservative Jew. Let's leave it at that. But I don't cover my hair. I don't adhere to quite the same types of observances that he does, or that is even within mainstream Orthodoxy, as you well know. And so we have this very interesting partnership. But there's actually a little bit more to our story, which is actually pretty unbelievable. Very soon after we started the center, I believe it was in the first few months, my mother-in-law had passed away in 2004. And I believe around the time we started the center, which was again now 6 years ago, my sister-in-law had been going through some papers of hers and of my mother-in-law's, and she found a paper that had been written about her husband, my father-in-law, whom I'd never met.
Oh.
I'd never met my father-in-law. He died before Jeff and I actually even met
Is
one
Jeff
another.
an attorney?
Jeff is also a law professor.
law
Also
professor,
at the
sorry.
other Catholic law school in
Loyola.
Chicago.
Oh,
Exactly.
Okay. You take care of it all.
Yeah,
right?
we got the whole Catholic market cornered in the Qual family. So my sister-in-law had found this letter, and the letter had been written about my father-in-law, Jeff's dad. And the letter was about, it was written by the head of a yeshiva in Suwalk, Lithuania, where my father-in-law had been born
Oh,
and
that's
had
where
lived.
my grandparents were from also.
From Lithuania?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Ashachuk, one of them.
Oh, really? Okay. So lots of Litvaks, right,
Yeah,
among
yeah.
them. So this letter was praising my father-in-law and saying what a wonderful rabbinic student he is and how he'll make a wonderful rabbi. He was a real tzaddik, righteous person, from what I had known of him, from what everyone's told me. And the letter was signed by the head of the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva in Suwalk, Lithuania. So I thought this is pretty cool, and they got it translated. It was written in Yiddish, I believe, but my sister-in-law or a relative on my husband's side gotten it translated into English. So my husband sent me the translation, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. I'm going to just email it to my co-director so he can see I have some pedigree, right? Even though by marriage, right?
Yeah,
Well,
right.
You know, so I sent it off to Steve.
That you're kosher.
Exactly, that I'm kosher, right? So I sent it off to Steve Resnikoff, my co-director, and within a half hour, he actually called me at home.
Oh.
And I remember this very, very well. And he said, "Bobby, I can't believe this."
Oh.
And I said, "What?" And I thought he was actually talking about some little political situation that was going on at our law school at the time. And I think I said to him, "Oh, yeah, I know. Can you believe it?" He goes, No. You don't know what I'm talking about." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, the letter you emailed me." I said, "Oh, yeah, that's really cool. The Rosh
Yeah.
Yeshiva wrote that about my father-in-law. I've
Yeah,
never met him."
yeah.
He goes, "You don't understand. The Rosh Yeshiva was my great-grandfather."
Oh, isn't that something?
It was so.
Small
It's one of those
world,
meant
as
to
they
be,
say.
yes, or as we say, beshert in
Beshert,
the
right.
Ashkenazic tradition, or meant to be, or what have you. So yeah, so it was really interesting. It's a totally true story. He had never known that. We had never made that connection. It was just very, very
Oh,
interesting.
right.
So yeah, so this was 6 years ago, and we are now, as I said, we're going into our 6th year, and we have several goals. A lot of people say, well, what does a Jewish law center do? You know, and the question that we oftentimes hear is, well, what is Jewish law? You know, what does Jewish law
yes.
have to do with anything that you
Yeah,
possibly are doing?
yeah.
So I think maybe it's good to maybe take a step back and just talk about it in very general terms, what Jewish law is and why we're talking about it in a law school.
Right.
And then we can talk about some of the goals of the centers.
Yes.
Some of the programs that we have done and are going to do. So Jewish law, you know, what a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily understand about Jewish law is that it is a very all-encompassing system of law that governs every aspect of human behavior, including the order in which you should put on and tie your shoes. I didn't know that until I did some research. Jewish
I
law
didn't know
actually has
that.
something to say about the order in which you put your shoes on and tie them.
So difficult.
Right.
I mean, to somebody that's not familiar with it.
Exactly. It covers everything. I mean, most people think of, okay, it covers Shabbat and keeping kosher. It's actually
and don't ride on
governs
Saturday.
Exactly, and it's actually so much more extensive.
I know. I
than
have
that.
relatives that have converted to very Orthodox. Her
Right.
husband left her.
Oh, wow.
Oh, well.
And
that's her
so, yeah,
problem.
so you know that it really covers a very broad, it covers really, I think it's fair to say that Jewish law covers every aspect of human behavior.
Yes.
So at this point in time, you know, people are very interested in questions such as, what does Jewish law have to say about appropriate business ethics? What does Jewish law have to say about medical ethics? What does
Right.
Jewish law have to say about war and tragic choices within Jewish law? You know, can you separate conjoined twins? My co-director is actually working on a book on these
And
particular
what's the
issues.
answer to that?
Well, you got to have my co-director.
Oh,
He can tell
okay,
you,
okay.
right? So,
Okay.
People are now really interested in what Jewish law has to say. And so one of the goals of our center is to educate both Jews as well as non-Jews, quite
Right,
honestly,
right.
as to what is the genius, the continued relevance of Jewish ethics and Jewish law, and how does this wonderful tradition apply to the issues we face in contemporary times that face all people, you know, not necessarily just Jews. A lot of people want to know, what is the Jewish law position?
Yeah, a lot of young people are becoming religious now.
Absolutely.
Correct? I know. I'm invited to a wedding in Beverly Hills, California in August, and this couple, my friend's grandson, is very, very Orthodox, and nobody else in the family is. He just went to Israel once and came back, and that's what he wanted, and he's marrying this Jewish girl from Costa Rica, actually.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, and it's going to be such a Orthodox wedding, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you've really hit upon really what I see as the second and a very important part of our goal as a center. And I think your story about the wedding that you're describing really hits upon this. You know, we are in such a integrated society today, both Jewishly as well as certainly apart from just the Jews, where everybody is mixing. It's not, we are not enclavists. We do not have just, segments of Orthodox Jews, segments of conservative Jews, segments of Reform Jews, because people are constantly, intermixing with one another. And that story that you just told, Joyce, is not an uncommon story.
Oh, really?
People
Yeah.
constantly, I'm hearing constantly stories about, my son or daughter married someone really religious, or sometimes it happens the other way.
Well,
and
both of them were religious before they met. Actually.
Exactly. But the
on their
families are
own.
not. But,
Yeah,
but his family
families
is
are
not.
definitely not.
So I think it's so critical for there to be more opportunities and more venues to bring Jews from different backgrounds together. And that's really a second very important goal of our center. If you come to some of our programs, you will see lots of men wearing kippot, skull caps. You will sometimes see women, dressed in longer dresses and completely covered with shadels. And you will see that all the way to, jeans and T-shirts and people that, are clearly not religious. And sometimes we get sometimes we get people that come to our programs that are not even Jewish. And so we really have a very broad spectrum of people that attend our programs. And that's intentional on our part because we really want to bring people from different backgrounds in the Jewish community together to talk to one another, to dialogue with one another. Because as you know, if you know people from different backgrounds, it begins to shatter your stereotypes, and you can begin to have more meaningful dialogue and respect and appreciation for one another, which I at least feel is a very, very important part of what we try to do.
And the young people want to have a lot of children. They often do, and that's good. There will be more Jewish people because nowadays they have one or two children, people that aren't that religious, many of them, and so much intermarriage. I think it's good that there'll be I don't know if that's the right word.
Sure.
Populating with more children.
Sure. And I think, again, here, Joyce, you've hit upon what I'm really researching now and writing about now, which is really the salient question. We know that Orthodoxy is growing. We know that the birth, and this is true both in the United States as well as in Israel, the birth rates are high.
Yes.
And I think the challenge, there's a number of challenges, but the challenge that I think you've hit upon, which is an important challenge for the Jewish community generally, is how do you forge meaningful Jewish identity outside of the Orthodox community? Because the majority of Jews, even now, both here and in Israel, are not Orthodox, and yet, if you think about questions involving Jewish continuity, if you think about questions involving Jewish peoplehood, which are really the terms that are being used in the discourse today, when you talk about the Jewish community, it's peoplehood that people are talking about. We still have to, figure out that path between the law part, the observance part, and how that gets integrated in a way that non-Orthodox Jews who do not see all the commandments as necessarily binding and incumbent on them can still be linked to the tradition. How do you forge that identity? It's a difficult question. People are writing about it from an academic standpoint. People are trying to implement on the ground various initiatives to try to face that issue. And actually, our center is doing a program up here in the suburbs on October 22nd, and it's called Forging Jewish Identity in the Me generation. This is the millennial generation that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to look at rabbinic perspectives, institutional perspectives, and parental perspectives, because this generation is also very different from their predecessors.
Yeah, well, there's not that many Jewish people left in Europe, probably, are there? Most people are probably
the majority of Jews. I think Israel has the largest number of Jews, and the second largest number of Jews in the diaspora is certainly in the United States.
Yes.
And of course, there are pockets of Jews, throughout the world, as we all very well know. But the numbers are definitely. There is decline. We know that. There's not just assimilation and intermarriage. There's a number of factors that contribute toward a declining population. Of course, not the least of it.
I sometimes think instead of terrorists getting rid of Jews, the Jews will get rid of their own selves by all the intermarriage. And
The intermarriage, and I would say also, the strife between the denominations is
oh,
another
yes,
thing that's
yes. In fact,
problematic.
intermarriage, it's usually the person converting is very strong if they're turned
Well,
to
by
Judaism.
intermarriage, I mean, there's
Yeah.
two ways to look. You can say intermarriage between one denomination
Oh,
and
yes,
another, right?
yes.
But then there's intermarriage between Jews, and non-Jews.
Yeah, that's
And-
what I was speaking
right.
about.
Which
Yeah.
and the rate is about 50%. The
Yeah,
statistics
but
show.
often the person that converted it has become very religious.
If there is a conversion, right?
Yes, if there is
right,
a conversion,
right. And if there's
correct.
a conversion, of course, it's not really an intermarriage. If there's a conversion
No, that's
prior
true.
to marriage,
That's
yeah.
true. Yeah, legally.
Legally, right, right.
Okay. Did you want to speak about your book or your
Well,
books?
I'm writing, the book that I published in 2010 with Stanford University called The Soul of Creativity, was a book that actually, it's interesting because that book in some ways led me to the present research that I'm doing now on Jewish law. So that book, The Soul of Creativity, is really a book that looks at how much can a work of authorship, a poem, a book, music, dance, art, literature, anything that's protected by copyright law. How much can that work be changed by someone other than the author and still be considered that person's work? I mean, in lay person's terms, that's really the issue that I was looking at. And in the course of writing that book, I did a lot of work on what motivates human creativity, and I looked at the Jewish tradition in particular, along with the Christian tradition. I looked at what artists are saying about what motivates their own personal creativity, and I did a lot of work on why people create, and how people create, and what motivates them to create. But that may sound, well, how do you get from there to Jewish law? Because it doesn't, there's not an intrinsic connection necessarily. But in the course of thinking about what motivates artistic creativity and how we protect the voice of the author in his or her creative work, I started thinking about the Jewish tradition, which, as we've just discussed before, is really composed of this, part of it is very legal, part of it is really narrative and not legal, but it's this wonderful tradition. And I started thinking about how much of the Jewish tradition can be changed, can be modernized, and yet still be considered the Jewish tradition. And so when I thought about it, I realized that the issues I was looking at from the standpoint of copyright law in The Soul of Creativity were not all that different from what I was going to be looking at in my next book, which is actually called Authenticity of the Chosen, a look at Jewish law and culture. That's at least the working title.
And when will that book be ready?
God willing, that book will be. I just wrote to my editor this morning. I'd like to.
Stanford Press.
This is Oxford. The second book is with Oxford.
Oh, the other one was Stanford.
Right.
Correct.
I hope to submit the draft to them a year from now, give or take. And I believe Oxford takes maybe 6 months to get it into print. So we're looking at a year and a half, 2 years perhaps from now, if all goes well. You never quite know.
How do you have time for everything?
That's a good question. I mean, I love writing, so to me,
Yes.
that's pure joy. I'm up very early. You've probably received a few of my 5:30, 6 o'clock a.m. emails over the course
I'm
of.
still up from the night before.
Oh my gosh!
I'm just the opposite.
So you're a night person.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Right, exactly.
I don't like to even plan things in the morning.
Oh, okay. No, I love getting my cup of coffee. It's the first thing I do. I get my cup of coffee and then I'm on email. So it's, So, I like to get a lot of work done in the morning when.
Yeah, well, actually, the mind is clearer.
Yeah, I
in the
think that's
morning.
absolutely.
Yeah, when I've had to had appointments or something early, I was happy because it makes the day so much longer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And usually I don't even sleep late anyway, but I just not ready to go to bed yet.
Right, exactly, exactly.
And you yourself, are you Orthodox or?
One of my friends who is Orthodox jokingly called me frum conservative, frum being the
frum.
term that we use for very
I
Orthodox
know.
people. No, I'm not Orthodox. I mean, I honestly think like a conservative Jew. By that I mean the way conservative lawmaking takes place. Which is a little bit more looking at what's called extra legal factors. By that I mean conservative lawmaking doesn't just stick to the primary sources, the rabbinic sources. It does tend to go outside those sources from time to time, and depending on the issue, it's more complicated, of course, than I'm making it at this point. But I tend to think about law more like a conservative Jew.
Oh.
But I'm observant. I walked to Shul, as you may know. We moved to Highland Park a year ago, and we moved there so I could walk. That was the whole point.
I visited my cousin, who's like a born-again Orthodox, or whatever you want to call her. She walks 4 miles.
Wow.
In Silver Spring. So when I stayed there, we just stayed at her daughter's in Baltimore. I couldn't walk 4 miles each
4 miles
way.
is a lot. It would be very hard. Plus, you're dressed up, and it's difficult. So,
I think so. I know for a while I attended 3 synagogues at the same time: the Chabad, and that's an Orthodox.
Sure.
And North Suburban Synagogue Bethel, conservative, and then not B'nai Torah, but the rabbi that used to be there. He opened his own, Rabbi Megadovich. He has since given up the rabbinic life and become a builder or developer in Israel.
Oh, wow.
His whole family moved there. But anyway, I prefer the conservative. I've always been, I feel most comfortable, and I try to go to that.
Well, listen,
Mostly.
everybody, I think, again, part of my thinking about the denominations, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it in the course of researching the book. I've been writing this second book for about 4 years, so it's been a long, long time.
Oh, right.
And part of my thinking about it is just really, I've really come to the conclusion that, people are different. People are going to, and there is no one size fits all. Not for something as personal as religion. But at a certain point, I do feel strongly about Jewish peoplehood, and I do feel strongly about people. I think the most difficult challenge we have are not the people that are affiliated with Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. It's the people who are not affiliated, who are apathetic, and they don't care, and they don't want to be affiliated.
At least you're doing something, following it some way.
Exactly.
Just like at one of the synagogues, the Chabad, people drive there. The rabbi would rather have them come than not come at all.
Right, of course.
Not everybody, but some people do.
Right.
They live in other suburbs even, it's such a long walk.
Sure.
Yeah. And there aren't many, isn't Bethel the only conservative temple in Highland Park?
That's a really good question. Well, I'm a new Highland Park resident myself, but I believe you're correct about that. I believe
amazing.
Bethel